team asked me to assess my personal leadership style, I'm pretty intense. And some people like that and some people don't like that. I have very, very high expectations from myself and other people. I love to roll up my sleeves and get engaged in the work of the work. So in many respects, a small startup, whether it's in a big company or a standalone, fits my leadership style better than if I were to manage a department, an ongoing department in a large company. I think at times in the years I spent at Honeywell, I was seen as too overpowering for the role because I want to go fast, I want to win, and I want to do, and that's not always the culture of a larger, more established company. I think in my leadership style, I insist that no one should have to watch their back. In fact, we just let somebody leave our team as gracefully as possible because it felt to me like we were having to watch our backs, and I don't think that people can do productive work if they're always worrying about other people maneuvering. And I just don't think anybody's smart enough or competent enough to get away with being a prima donna and have it add value. Best or worst moments. Well, I debated whether I was going to tell you this story or not, but I will. It's very embarrassing, so probably you'll enjoy hearing it. When I was at Honeywell, I was leading virtually all men. I was leading home automation, home security at the time, pretty technical area. And it was the second year in a row that I'd been asked to speak at a 95% male technology conference in San Diego about technology in the home. The first year I had spoken and they'd comped me this beautiful room at the Del Coronado overlooking the ocean. It was just beautiful, but it was lonely. So the second year when I was asked to speak, I thought, I've got this figured out. I'll use my frequent flyer miles. I'll bring my kids out, my husband. They'll share this gorgeous suite, and they can stay after the meeting. So my girls at that time were about 3 and 5, I think. And I was pleased with the way my speech had gone. The next morning, the girls wanted to go down to the pool right away, of course. So Steve was still in the room, and I went down to the pool. I was sitting on the lawn chair. Have any of you ever been at the Del Coronado? So big picture windows. The whole lobby has big picture windows, and between the ocean and the lobby is this swimming pool. So I was just so relaxed, and I was thinking, I really have it together. My life is in balance. I'm a good mom. I gave a good speech. Life is good. I'm on top of my game. Well, as most women did in those days, I had a 2-piece bikini. And after I'd been out there about half an hour, my daughter yelled from the pool, "Mom, what's that white thing you're wearing?" And I looked down, and I had on the floral bottom to my bathing suit, and I had on a white pennies bra. I'd left the bathing suit top on my bed, thinking, just trying to rush to get out. At that point, I couldn't yell at the kids to get out of the pool, because then if anyone hadn't noticed me, they would certainly notice me then when the kids started to protest. So I just had to sit there and act like that's what everybody wears at the pool until my husband came down and I was able to dash back to the room. So, I think the story is important because I think balance is an illusion anyway. And I think it's important to have a sense of humor. I think the greatest challenges, I've had so many great challenges because that's something I seek. I love to pit myself against the nearly impossible. So I would say the first time that it happened was when I was an exchange student in the Netherlands when I was 15 for 3 months and I didn't speak Dutch. I was miserable. I was very, very homesick, but I had the time of my life. Both were true. And the lesson in that was that I could go anywhere and not know anything about the customs or the language and figure it out. When I went to Honeywell, it felt just like that. All of my training had been in education, and all of my work experience had been in education. And I went to Honeywell, and I was clueless. At that time, Honeywell didn't bring in people from the outside in management level positions, and I came in as a manager. But I treated it much like my experience in the Netherlands. It's all about observing culture and learning language and asking lots and lots of questions. I kept a notebook with me, and I literally understood about 2 words out of every sentence. I'd just write down all the questions and then get them answered and just keep slogging through it. And my PhD was like that as well. I was going to nights. All my graduate degrees were at night school. But I remember thinking, how do you get there from here? I mean, the classwork's sort of easy. You go to class, you do your homework, and, you know, it's prescribed. But how do you even choose a topic, much less write a dissertation, much less argue it to a committee? It just felt totally overwhelming to me. And I just went back to my experience in the Netherlands. You just figure it out one little piece at a time. And you know, each of those experiences I've relived so many times in my business career. When I took the job at MinuteClinic, I'd never raised venture capital before. I didn't have the slightest idea. I'd never written a business plan before. I mean, I'd done strategic planning presentations, a bazillion of them. But writing a business plan or talking to venture capitalists, I think it's all about your attitude. You just figure it out, just one bite at a time. Best piece of advice, you know, that's hard because I have lots of opinions. I think it would be that no matter what the disappointment, or no matter what the failure, or matter what the tragedy, I think there are always, always opportunities and gifts available if you can discern them. And I think that's really important because there have always been setbacks in my career or in my life. I mean, you can't be alive without experiencing those. But there are always gifts available if you have eyes to see them or ears to hear them. And I think that requires us to be more centered than we often are. Anne Morrow Lindbergh, who wrote Gift from the Sea, it's a beautiful book. It's an old book, but it's a beautiful book. But she uses the analogy of dancing. And if you're always leaning into the next music beat or looking at your calendar or thinking about what has to be done next month or next week, or you're preoccupied with the previous beat, thinking about what you did wrong yesterday or what you forgot to do, you can't dance because you're not on the beat. And I think really being centered is just essential to be able to notice the gifts that are always abundant. I think life is abundant, and there is an abundance everywhere, but I think we need to be really centered to notice it. I guess, you know, when you get on a plane and the flight attendant says, when the oxygen masks come down, make sure you put the mask on yourself first and then the child, which is so counterintuitive. I mean, there you are, people are scared, there's a problem in the plane, there might be smoke, and you're sitting with a 6-year-old child and you're going to put it on yourself first? Of course you are. Because if you don't, you can't put it on the child. And I think work is just like that. I know the times when I'm not proud of the way I manage, or I'm not proud of the way I contribute in a meeting, it's because I haven't been taking care of myself. I either haven't gotten enough sleep, or I've driven myself too hard, or I just haven't taken care of the things that I know are really important to keep me balanced. So, you know, I think that oxygen mask on a plane metaphor is really important to keep in mind. I don't know what to say about a female perspective because I've always been one, so I don't know what to say about that. On some MinuteClinic questions, I was asked to comment. When I came to MinuteClinic, we had no money. I was told that we'd have $1 million by the end of the month in April, and we got $30,000. So it was either shut down altogether, in which that's what the board asked me to come up. We learned we got $30,000 on a Friday. They asked me to come in on Monday and talk about how to shut it down. So I created a plan to gracefully shut it down, and then on Sunday afternoon I kept thinking the saying, there are always 3 or more alternatives, and there always are to any situation. So I came up with an alternative that would be draconian, to be sure, but would keep us afloat hopefully long enough to see if there were some money available somewhere. So that plan involved shutting down 3 clinics, just going with 4 that were limping along, but they were limping at a faster pace than the 3 that we shut down. Continuing to pay the nurse practitioners with the $30,000 that we had in the revenues that were being generated in the summer by the patient visits. Stop paying all vendors. Most of them hadn't been paid for a while anyway. And I would not take a salary until we raised the first $1 million, as long as that took. I would take a personal loan out at the bank because I was the sole support for my family. And the other 4 people at corporate could either take a sabbatical for the summer or work without pay. And we would seek some convertible debt immediately and start a venture financing round. So we did do that, and I paid for the office supplies on my credit card. We didn't pay the vendors. We had a person at the time who was a terrible CFO, but she was very sweet, and the vendors loved her. When she would say, "We can't pay you, I promise we will sometime, we're trying to," and they loved her. So she would, I don't know how we got so much stuff where we weren't paying. We had to keep switching vendors because at a certain point they'd stop supplying us. But we did raise the money and everybody got paid. I went 9 months without a salary in that scenario. Target, I think the team covered that well. Target doesn't like to partner with other companies. And they told us they don't do that. And they're not structured to do that. They like to own it themselves, which is why they opened their own clinics. They have not yet opened the clinics where we were in their stores in Baltimore. They have opened them here in Minneapolis, but when I was there as recently as 2 weeks ago, they're still not providing any health insurance coverage, which I think will cause them problems. Why did I take the job for nothing? I said I never would. I said I wanted to be in a startup, but I couldn't afford it. But after the position was presented to me and I was told that I'd have a good salary, and I went to the clinics and I saw them and I thought it was definitely a home run. And it was only after I fell in love with the opportunity that I learned there was no salary. So I decided, what the heck? I could take it. If there wasn't going to be a salary within a month, say, I'd just quit and I'd have had the experience. Or if there was going to be money at the end of the month, that'd be fine. Well, the end of the month came, there wasn't any money, and I didn't want to quit. But that's why I took it. I would do it again in a nanosecond. It's fabulous for me. The importance of software and nurse practitioners. Well, nurse practitioners are nationally board certified. They're RNs with 2 years of graduate school beyond. So they're trained and licensed in each state to do 80% of what family practice doctors do. MinuteClinic taps into about 10% of their expertise. So, and also, nurse practitioners are legally able to dispense prescriptions in all 50 states. RNs are not, so that's why it was key. The publicity was interesting. We tried to avoid publicity. Did anybody ever see the British comedy Rise and Fall of Reginald Perrin? Oh, it's hysterical if you can ever find them on Netflix. They're just hysterical, but it's all about, the British satire, and they try their best to create a company that will fail. And so they hire all the worst possible candidates they can think of for each of the positions. And they succeed, and anyway. But we tried really hard not to get publicity because we didn't want copycats. And there we got a full page in the New York Times, including a full picture in July of '03. But that was really important. It did generate copycats, but people were going to copy us anyway. They were going to hear about it. And the publicity was huge. The only reason I think CVS came after us, and they came after us, was because of all the publicity that we got. And it wasn't because we hired a great PR agency. It was because healthcare, there's so little good news right now, and we represented such great news in an otherwise very bleak landscape. And I was asked to talk about how my position at UnitedHealth, or what about my position at UnitedHealth and how it prepared me to take on MinuteClinic prepared me. I'm launching a new business at UnitedHealth. We haven't announced it yet, but we are looking at developing a social network for 18 to 34-year-olds, initially targeting college grads, to provide the kinds of tools that used to be provided if you went to work for the same employer for the next 20 years. However, you're not going to do that. On average, 18 to 34-year-olds will change jobs 9 times during that time frame. You also are unlikely to be able to get health insurance from your employer. Or if you do, it might be a couple of those 9 employers, and there'll be big gaps in between. So we've created a new kind of health insurance that we're very excited about that will provide continuity from employer to employer, covering the gaps and so forth. Also budgeting tools for you, tips about buying your first house, managing debt, and so forth. So it's an array of services for the 20-somethings. MinuteClinic helped prepare me simply because I know now that I can take a blank slate and create something that's of value. Doing it in a big company is easier and it's harder. It's easier because you don't have to beg for money from 200 VCs, and it's harder because you have a lot of cross-organizational needs, and it's just different. I don't think it's easier or harder, it's just different. What do I think has allowed for MinuteClinic's continued success? I think we built a very, very strong model. We tested it. We didn't take any shortcuts. We were very attentive to detail. I think we didn't overhype what we were doing. One of the competitors, Take Care, said they were going to have 500 clinics last year. I think they've closed half the clinics they opened, and I think they have about 8. I think we didn't do stupid things. Ready Clinic recruits their nurse practitioners sight unseen over the internet. I met one of them in a clinic I visited in Texas. That's stupid. I think we were just very, very careful about what we did. We got good advisors. We got Glenn Nelson chaired our board. He's as good as you could possibly get. We were a little bit lucky, but I think we just did our homework. And it's clearly a need. Clearly a need. It was so fun for me. We had hoped that MinuteClinic would become, I forget what you call it, Kleenex is the brand, but that's what you refer to the category. What's that word? Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. Well, I was at a national life insurance or health insurance conference in New York last week for 3 days, and every day several of the speakers referenced MinuteClinic and used MinuteClinic as the name for the category. So that was really fun. What I wanted to do is stand up and say, you all made our lives so difficult, because the insurers had everything to gain by putting us in network. They could save $1 bazillion, but you have to get into the provider network, and usually the provider network is protected by some doctors, and many doctors don't like MinuteClinic because we charge a lot less than they do. So those are the comments that the team asked me to address. I'm open to any discussion or questions. Yes, Linda.
Throughout your paper, the paper that the team wrote, it was saying all these innovations that you developed through all of your career experience. And I was just wondering, how do you see these opportunities when they're not so visible sometimes? They're invisible.
How do you see them when?
Well, like, how do you find those opportunities? Like, you develop so many different programs, no matter where you worked. How
right.
are you able to?
You know, I don't know. When I was growing up, my mom always used to say, you're just not creative. And I never was. I always just defined myself as not creative because I wasn't artistically. I mean, when I was 10, I didn't even like my artwork, It's just, I couldn't do it. But I am really creative when it comes to business. And I don't know why. Part of it, I think, that's been helpful is that I've never spent a huge amount of time in any one industry. So I don't enter an industry having preconceived notions of what the rules are. So in each case, I've looked at it from the point of view of the person who either has to use or install the service or the widget, and I think that's a very helpful perspective. I also naturally look to see how resources can be combined in ways that will leverage them. So I'm always looking for new combinations that will just add greater value, and that ultimately results in, I think, more creative solutions. And probably just because I'm always curious and I want to learn. I don't know how else to answer that. Yes?
I just have a question for the healthcare industry overall. Do you see us eventually following the lines of Canada and Europe and becoming a kind of state-owned healthcare, having?
I would love to have the knowledge to answer that question. I would say another reason that I've been able to be successful is because it's really easy for me to put blinders on. And at MinuteClinic, I didn't have to know about insurance at all. I just needed to get us in the network. And that's all I needed to know. And so I didn't learn the other stuff because I couldn't fit it in. I am at an insurance company. I'm at United now, and you'd think I'd know that answer to your question, but I don't, because I'm focusing on learning what I need to know for my new business. So maybe down the road I'll know more. But I mean, it's a crime that we have 46 million uninsured people in this country. It's horrible. Sorry.
You talk about balance between work and life and work and service. Then you also say balance is an illusion. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, that's kind of paradoxical, isn't it? Because I think of balance like a mobile. And if there were a mobile in this room right now, it would always be fluttering, chaotically when we open the door. But at any point in time, it's just kind of finding its center, and that's what I mean by it ever being completely done or completely balanced. I mean, it is for fleeting moments.
It's not a set.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Yes.
With all your degrees concentrated on education, how did you get into the business and corporate aspects of things?
When I was raised in a small town in northern Michigan, in Traverse City, in the 50s, and my grandfather, my father, and both my brothers were all physicians. From a very young age, I was told I could not be, and I could not be a nurse. I was told I couldn't be, this is really gross, I couldn't be a hen medic. But I was told I could be a teacher. So I was obedient then, and I picked what I thought was the most difficult aspect of education I could. So I went into special ed and social work and so forth. When I finished my doctorate and my other degrees at night school in 1980, times had changed a lot between 1965 and 1980, a whole lot. In fact, there's a wonderful book. I graduated from college in 1969, and some of the women here may want to read this book. It's Women Who Wear White Gloves, because Hillary graduated that year too, and it's just a fascinating time. It was before feminism was just barely starting, and when I read that book, I had allowed myself to forget how sexist the environment was for women at that time. But so in 1980, my dad said, "Well, I'll send you to medical school. I get it now." And it was, it just wasn't going to happen then. It was too late. Although I think I would have loved being a physician, actually. So I just did, I think I did 85 information interviews during the summer with companies just to see what business people did, because I was restless. I didn't want to stay in education. I wanted to make more money. And I was pretty fascinated with the people I met. I thought they seemed pretty interesting, despite my misgivings about business people, which was my own prejudice from the 60s. So that's how I got hired and worked hard.
You talked about your leadership style being intense and rolling up your sleeves and getting involved. What's your self-talk and what tactics you use to keep yourself from micromanaging?
That's a really good question. I think the downside manifestation of what I described is that I like to play the game a lot. It'd be like, what if the coach all of a sudden ran onto the football field and just started throwing the ball, because it's fun to play. And I struggle with that a bit. So that's a little different than micromanaging. It's more that I want to just jump in and help this team and do some of the work along with the team. I tend to give people a lot of space because I really don't like managing people. I really would just like it if it were a team and we just work it all together, which is what I'm doing right now at United, and that's much more fun. And I'm a resource if people need help with something. There's a cool book out now. I don't like business books, but I did read this one, and it was interesting. Something about a spider and a starfish. Do you know the one?
No, I don't.
But those two words are in it, spider and starfish, and it's about the new forms of organizations. and starfish being, because if you cut off its leg, it regenerates, and you get 2 starfishes or whatever, and if you cut off the spider's head, you get nothing. And so it's really a good book. It's short. It's really good. Yes?
How did the partnership with CVS happen, and why CVS?
That's a great question. It was the fall of '04, and we were in Targets. We were in Cub Super Value. I felt we should be in exclusive within a channel, but have one of each of the channels, because none of us knew whether grocery was the best, pharmacy would be the best, or mass merchant would be the best. So we had grocery and we had mass merchant, but we didn't have pharmacy. So Walgreens, I knew somebody from the Fed who was on the Walgreens board, long story short. Anyway, Walgreens brought me in and said, we'll give you these stores in Indianapolis. And I walked them, and they were icky. And they were the patient consulting rooms that they never used, so they were going to fill them with us. Bad locations. I went to at their invitation, corporate headquarters of Walgreens it's in Wisconsin. And everybody called them, everybody else Mr. It was all very formal, very slow, and we were going to be one of 100 pilots. And I just thought, no, we'll die. I mean, we just cannot, the culture clash was so big between the pace we had to move, our appetite for risk. I knew it was going to work with Walgreens. Rite Aid had asked us. They had financial problems, and I didn't want to be associated with them. Every city I'd go to, I'd ask people, well, where would you like to go to a MinuteClinic? And nobody liked Rite Aid. And so the third one was CVS. And frankly, I didn't even know anything about CVS because CVS wasn't here. But they asked me to come to talk to them. They came here, and I met with them once, and then they flew me to their corporate headquarters. It was about the week after Walgreens. And they were on fire. They are such a dynamic team. The CEO was in the room, the number 2, Chris Bodine, was in the room. The woman who developed their loyalty program, which is considered to be the best retail loyalty program maybe in the world, but certainly in the United States, she was just amazing. The conference room was just covered with consumer-oriented pictures, and I mean, the intensity, and they wanted an LOI in the next 10 days. And I knew that they got it. They got it strategically. They were on fire. And so I'm so glad we picked them. And we opened our first location 6 months later. And then actually they began the discussions to buy us in March. It was announced in July, and it was closed in September. So, yes?
I know that you, in the paper, they touched a little bit on kind of the female perspective. And I know you have a answer that. I was just wondering if there's any kind of advice that you would have for a female entrepreneur.
Well, the picture's bleak for female entrepreneurs in terms of numbers. Now, that shouldn't stop you. I mean, it only takes one. But in the study, I think that was done by, it was either done by an executive search firm or it was done by Catalyst in New York 2 years ago on parity. So if 10 means that women have achieved parity with men on number of boards of directors, there'd be a 10. Actually, it's probably at a 2. But if you look at parity for women with men running nonprofits, it's at like a 15 because there are many more women that do that. You understand the scale. So, and then they also rated, is it getting better or worse? For women CEOs of venture-backed companies, parity is 0.3% and getting worse. Now, it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means it's rare. But you can make that different. And I don't know why it is. I mean, it's really tough work. But women love tough work. So I don't know why it is. I mean, most VCs are men, but I'm not sure that's why it is. I don't know.
I'm just curious on how you go from losing $8 million of Quick Medics to getting people to raise $3.1 million. How do you, after you prove that you've lost, how do you get people to?
Well, every startup loses. So, in fact, the overall company is still not profitable. because they're plowing all the money that they get into building new clinics. It takes about $2 million to build out a new city, so even the initial 15 clinics. But that's what venture capital money is all about. I mean, they don't expect you to be profitable. It's really, they think you're really grown up if you're generating revenue at the time you're asking for money. But they don't expect, if you were profitable, you wouldn't go to a VC. But you can't make it all up in volume. You know, it's a lot about top line, but it's also about cost structure. We don't have plumbing in the MinuteClinics. We use kitty litter to dispose of the urine after the urine tests. You don't need plumbing. Back there.
You were saying it's kind of a bleak outlook for female entrepreneurs. For yourself, how did you encounter a lot of resistance while you were advancing through the corporate world? And do you think your experience was much more difficult because of your gender?
Definitely in the 80s. Definitely. Overtly so in the 80s. I don't know. I think it's kind of mixed. I mean, it's hard for me to remember all the men's names sometimes because they might all kind of look alike if they're all like 40s and 50s and I'm in a sea of them, and if I'm one of 3 or 4 women, they remember my name. And that can serve you well. You know, I never would have gotten named to the Federal Reserve Bank Board if I were male, I don't think. They wanted to recruit women executives, and I got picked for that. It was fabulous. So I think you get some good and you get some bad, and certainly if you carry a chip on your shoulder, you're going to get bad stuff. So I don't know how to answer your question.
I guess maybe some examples. I mean, you gave some examples of how it has helped you. I mean, were there some where it was detrimental or, it really hindered your advancement?
I don't even think about that much. I try to put those experiences just in the past. But yeah, there have been some terrible stories I'm sure you saw, or many of you have seen the movie, was it North Country, about the women miners? I mean, it really was like that. It really was not good for women in the 80s in manufacturing companies. I talked to a woman, I was doing a project before I went to United this summer. She was so cool, a really kind of crusty woman, and she ran a some sort of paper plant or something near the Iron Range or Duluth or something. Big, heavy-set woman, and she said she was the only woman working the night shift, and she was a supervisor, and she had left her desk for something, and she came back, and they had moved her desk and everything in it into the men's restroom to harass her, and she just worked there. She just went in, sat down, and went back to work. I don't think I would have had the guts to do it, but I think it was a way cool response. Lauren?
I know you have 2 younger daughters and one's in college. I know your education was kind of pushed upon you, kind of went in a direction because that's kind of what they gave you. Have you encouraged your daughters to go in any certain way or just do what they do?
That's a wonderful question. I have, actually, because my older daughter loves designer clothes. And so she was deciding what to take at college, and she's really, really good in languages. She's fluent in Spanish. So I urged her to take Chinese because she wants to go into business or law, and I think speaking Chinese is a ticket to better job possibilities if you have that aptitude anyway. So to that extent, yes, and it turns out she loves it. She's going to study at Middlebury this summer and do the Chinese immersion program and then take on German. So to that extent, yes, but whether she goes into business or law or politics or whatever, I mean, she's got to figure that out. It's important to me that my girls feel responsible for their own financial support. So to that extent, I try to influence them. Chris?
How do you attain the success that you have while raising 2 daughters? My 2 daughters, it's really tough to find time for myself and to set goals for myself when they need me.
How old are you girls?
13 and 17 now.
It is hard, and there are trade-offs, but then I think there are always trade-offs. You know,
network of people that helped you.
when my kids were very young, I had a live-in nanny, and then my former husband chose not to work outside the home. So the good with that was that he covered a lot of logistics. The bad with that was that then the full financial support was on me, and that felt like a pretty heavy burden some of the time. You know, I just think there are always trade-offs. I would not have been a good mother if I had been home full-time. I would have driven my girls crazy. I would have been way too involved in their lives and way too, I mean, my capacity is too great. I'm too high energy. So I think you just do things at different stages of their lives and your life. And I didn't play tennis. I didn't play cards. I mean, I had no social life. That's true. Zero social life. But work and family stuff. Yes?
And I must ask, what do you consider to be a balance?
I'm sorry?
Well, what would you consider to be a balance in your life? Or suggest for us as well?
For me, balance is trying to get 7 hours of sleep a night. I used to think I didn't need to do that. And I don't think that I was functioning at the top of my game as a result. So 7 hours of sleep, time with family and friends is really important to me. Work, time for church activities. Those are the ones that are important to me. But you know, time with friends. I have a couple of really close women friends, and I don't see them that much. But you always pick up where you left off. And I did never accept business calls at home. In fact, I didn't answer the phone at home. Once I got home, I didn't want to deal with that. I only wanted to be with my family. Everybody has to figure it out for yourself, though, and it's different at different stages of your life.
Can you talk about the mentorship program that you alluded to? That your business?
It's called Mentium. Mentium. MENTIIUM, and companies purchase slots for high talent people in their organizations that they want to have assign a mentor. And then men and women executives from across the Twin Cities agree to take on a mentee for a year at no charge as a volunteer. Yes?
I worked for a year in microfinance, so I was wondering, you brought that up, and I was wondering what experience you've had. I mean, do much of it.
Gosh, I think it's so cool. I have belonged to Opportunity International, or I have given money to Opportunity International for the last 10 years. And when I updated my will this last spring and decided where I wanted to give anything that's left from my estate, I realized I was going to narrow it down to 3 or 4, and then I decided that I would also narrow where I give my time more, and I've decided Opportunity International is going to be a key one for me, so I'm now on their board of governors. But it's the 35-year-old organization that gives loans to the poorest of the poor in 30 countries around the world, and the whole notion, the average loan size is $85, and they give them to a trust. So usually it's women who get them, because usually in developing countries, women are at the bottom of the poverty. And it might be a loan so that a woman can have a second cooler, so she can sell twice as much produce beside the road. That trust bank of 20 people guarantees everyone else's loan. And it means that if somebody steals the money, all 20 of them are going to march down to the bar and get it back. You know? So it's very exciting, but in 30 countries, and now they're also opening banks so they can take savings, because in many of these countries, you have to pay for somebody to protect your money. You don't earn interest. You pay for somebody to protect your money. So the idea of getting 10% interest from Opportunity International is really cool. And they do it all through biometric, a thumbprint ID, so you don't have to have other resources. And then they're also doing burial insurance, because in many of these countries that are rampant with AIDS, it costs 3 to 6 months' salary to bury a loved one. So this burial insurance allows them to do that and not sacrifice the rest of the family. So anyway, I think microfinance is way cool. It was the Nobel Peace Prize this year for Bangladesh? In Bangladesh, yes. Yes?
Linda.
Uh-oh.
Public relations, and I understand you didn't want any public relations, but we've talked in here about the value of public relations to start with. If you could talk about the value of maybe public relations to marketing, and also alternatively, or in addition, if you could talk about any thoughts or ideas, insights you have on how to get media attention and how to interest reporters in a story, because to have 12, as you said, stations want to tell your story just because you got shut down for a few days, and that's extraordinary.
I should clarify. I thought we should have a lot of press. The board did not, because they were afraid the secret would get out. I felt like we had to be seen as much bigger than life in order to get a chance to tell our story. So I think PR, in fact, we couldn't afford advertising, so we did everything with PR, and I think it's a fabulous communication vehicle that has far more credibility than advertising. They really came to us in most cases because we were so innovative. But I think a key is answering every phone call. I mean, I just can't tell you how many colleagues I have who don't bother answering every phone call. And I always answer every phone call, and you never knew when it was going to be somebody calling from Walmart or somebody calling from the New York Times. It's just some of those simple things. And doing it in a timely way. I mean, I did a story today, I responded to a reporter today, having to do with a story she's writing on Mayo Clinic Executive Health Program. Now, it took half an hour of my day. It has nothing to do with my job. But she appreciated my accessibility, and hopefully the next time when I want something associated with my job, she'll be willing to hear me out. I do think it's hard to pick a good public relations firm. We failed at 2 that we picked. We hired 2 and fired 2, or maybe 3. And then we really finally found one that I loved. And it was a small boutique in Baltimore called TBC. But they did the work of the work. Some of the huge PR firms always want to just take you to lunch, and it drives me crazy. I don't want to be taken to lunch. I'm too busy. I'm doing the work. If we have a problem, just fix the problem. Don't schmooze me. It's hard to pick a good public relations firm, I think. But when you get a good one, it's just gold. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, and do you have any other tips on how to interest reporters in stories, or how to actually scrape up some media attention if you don't otherwise have it coming and knocking on the door?
I think it's all about what you'd like to read about. So if you're wanting to pitch to the suburban newspapers, what do you think those people would want to read about in the suburban newspaper, and then pitch it to the reporter that way? The more of their work that you do, the better. So you can even write it for them. Would be great in a way that's very readable. It's not my field of expertise, but I just love it, so I don't know how to answer.
You don't have any reservation picking up the phone and calling a reporter and saying, I've got a story.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, I don't have reservations doing that to anybody about anything, so that's why I didn't think about answering it in that way. Absolutely, yeah. You find out just read the paper and see whose articles might be at all related and call them up. Absolutely. Yes?
I know you said you don't get too much into all such things. I don't know how much this will relate with what you're doing right now, but insurance right now, it seems like it's going towards the financial industry.
Because of the health savings accounts,
yes, as opposed to the insurance companies, or how it has been run. Do you see that going anywhere? Where do you see that? What's happening there?
Well, do you know what HSAs are? Health savings accounts? No? Okay. In lay terms, which is really the only way I can explain it anyway, it's currently, if you go to work for an employer, you can put money aside from your salary pre-tax into a healthcare savings account, and then as you spend money on your co-pays for pharmacy or at the doctor, then you can draw it out of that account. The problem is if you estimate wrong, like if you say you want to set aside $1,000 for it, if you estimate wrong and you haven't used $1,000 at the end of the year, you lose the money. Or let's say you estimated right, but you get this great opportunity to change employers. The money doesn't go with you. That's the way it is today. The good news is it's pre-tax dollars, which is great. The bad news is you have to estimate right and can't take it with you when you leave. The new phenomenon is called HSA, Health Savings Account, and it works much like your retirement account does. It's pre-tax dollars, again, which is good, but it stays with you forever, in and out of employment, whatever employer you use, and it keeps earning interest. And you don't have to estimate because it's just a way you can save. Now, there's a max that you can put in it in any year. You can't put more than a few $1,000s in it each year, but you don't have to use it in that year. So theoretically, if you're healthy, you accumulate a lot that you can ultimately use for retirement or for some sort of catastrophic illness. And Clay Christensen, who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma and many other fabulous books about business innovation from the faculty at Harvard, spoke at the conference I attended last week. And he thinks the tipping point will occur for HSAs in 2 years, and there'll just be a tidal wave at that point. I don't know. I think the jury's out. But that's why you're seeing, that's when people talk about the merger between healthcare insurance and financial, that's the merger they're talking about. However, it doesn't mean that soon U.S. Bank will be offering health insurance. The opposite is occurring, however. UnitedHealth has its own bank. So we also provide credit services and so forth.
We get a lot of people through here, great stories, and a lot of things that they've done right. Can you kind of elaborate on some things, mistakes you've made along the roads, I don't know, misconceptions that you've had, just so that we can know so we don't make those same mistakes?
Sure. I've made lots of mistakes. I made several hiring mistakes at MinuteClinic, which is bad. But what's really bad is when I knew I needed to fire, I didn't. So I've really had trouble in my career trusting my instincts enough to act on them in a timely and quick fashion once I know somebody's not working out. You know, the adage is that you hire slowly and you fire fast, and that's really wise advice. I tend to second guess myself when I think somebody's not working out, and I keep thinking, well, if I coach them more, differently, better, whatever, and it doesn't do anybody any favors. So I made that mistake with a couple people at MinuteClinic. I also made a mistake. I agreed to bring on new board members too quickly, too glibly. When you bring on a board member, I mean, that's basically like getting married. They're there for life. And I wish that I had done more due diligence. Now, of course, deciding who was going to be on the board wasn't my decision alone. I was one of several directors who would decide. But I think whenever you're engaged, right now I'm leading a search for a public company board that I'm on. We're seeking 2 directors, and we're so careful because it's a huge decision and not to be taken lightly, and not to rely on anybody else's judgment, but to do tons of homework. Those are 2 examples. I don't know for sure. I mean, I don't know if I really could have done this or not, but in 2004, in the height of MinuteClinics, we had to get off the ground that year, or we just weren't going to. I had 4 family members die. My brother died. He had been a surgeon, and he had gotten hepatitis from doing surgery. His wife died of breast cancer. My mother-in-law died of a stroke, and my father-in-law died from surgery. And I really needed to take some time off. I didn't miss a day. And I think it was a mistake. I just didn't feel like the company, I felt like the company was too fragile, and it was very fragile. And we didn't have much depth on our management team at all. Nonetheless, I needed to have figured out some way, I think, to just take a little bit of a break. Those are some examples.
I know you said that if it didn't work out, you could just quit and find something new. But did you have any kind of more formal of an exit plan, what you were going to do with yourself and when it didn't work out?
No.
Just joking.
Yeah. But, I really can key fast, and I used to be a waitress in college. I don't know. I mean, I just think you can't scare yourself into staying someplace you don't want to be. I mean, you can, but I don't think it's a good idea to scare yourself to staying into someplace you don't want to be. Linda?
You said that you were the sole provider of the company when you decided to come on board with MinuteClinic. How did you reason with yourself and completely comfortable with the idea of taking this risk of losing so much?
That's a good question. Well, after 9 months, I did get a salary. It covered our living expenses, but I needed MinuteClinic to be a home run for my retirement, because when I had gone to Honeywell, I stayed there 15 years, and I went when the stock was high, and I left when it was low. And I went to Ceridian when the stock was high, and I left when it was low. And I knew it really needed to win for my retirement, but I didn't know if it would. I mean, it turned out it did, so that's wonderful, but I didn't know that it would. But I knew I really liked the work, and I knew it was important work to be doing, and I knew I didn't want to retire soon anyway. And I mean, I'm sort of facetious, but if you have your health and a library card, I mean, you don't need to have a second and a third house in your retirement. Yes?
You've obviously been extremely successful, and you're happy with what you're doing, but you're going to work for a long time. And so when you grow up, what would you like to do?
I don't know. That's just exactly how I feel. I think I would love to teach sometime, college. I don't know if I have another startup, not a inside a big company or, a small one on the outside. I don't know if I want to do that. I could see myself in a leadership role in Opportunity International, perhaps. I'm also working on an African mission project for our church. Our church is going to get involved in some mission work. I don't know, and it is exactly what you say. I've never had a career plan. I still don't. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying that's the way it is.
I was just a little confused earlier. I know that you're working for UnitedHealth right now, and you're inside of that organization creating another business.
Creating a new business.
I know that it's not started. You can't say much, but can you describe? Because I'm confused because I see United as being a healthcare provider, and then I hear social network, and then I guess not linked really well.
That's a really good question. First of all, United does a lot more than insurance. It has a bank. It sells to all health plans in the country. It has Ingenix, which is all data mining and data informatics, selling to pharmacies on drug trials and so forth. You don't hear about that. It also is one of the larger providers of EAP and work-life services to corporations. So it does a lot of different things. But the area I'm working on is aggregating tips, tools, coaches, and products that nonprofit organizations can provide their members, and one of the nonprofits is a social network that's being created for this demographic.
What is your favorite city in the world, and why?
Gosh, I love to travel so much. Well, I'm not a city person, so I will tell you where. I mean, it's always fun to go to cities, but that's not my favorite. I went to Kenya for 3 weeks on a photographic safari in 1981, and I would love to go back to the Masai Mara. I love to ski, but those are just the hills. I like to keep on going, so I don't go back to the same place. My 10th grade daughter is going to go to school in Switzerland starting in January for the rest of the school year. So I look forward to exploring some places with her. And I took my kids to Thailand last year for spring break. That was fun to explore those places. I don't have a favorite. Yes?
One of the parts of the paper here, it references the fact that due to the growth restrictions imposed by your investors, your team could not roll out new clinics at the rate CVS desired. And so at that point, you decided to sell. I imagine there would have been another option, that would have been to have a new group of investors.
That's right.
Existing. Can you talk about that decision process?
Sure.
That you went through at that point?
CVS really wanted to go fast. And as I mentioned, it's about $2 million to open a city with 8 to 10 clinics. And if the investor, so one choice was to raise more money. We always were oversubscribed. Both rounds we were oversubscribed, and people were in the wings saying, next time there's an opening in fundraising, we want to come in. Where were they when I was looking for $5,000 at a piece? Oh, my goodness. But anyway, so we could have had new investors come in, but that would have diluted the existing investors. We also could have gone public, but you really, I think with the Sarbanes-Oxley compliance costs and complexity, we probably weren't quite big enough to go public, and that you're really so dependent on the public markets when you do that. So another option was to sell. I was actually surprised that we got such a fabulous offer from CVS because we weren't in other retailers. So you think about it, would Walgreens buy us? We're not in any Walgreens. I mean, and so they wouldn't recover the investment made. And so the timing was right and their offer was right. I think it was just the convergence of knowing that we were going to have to raise more money to continue the expansion, CVS wanting it to go faster, not being quite ready for a public offering.
And one follow-up on that, you sold for 10 times revenue, which is extraordinary. Would you have sold for 2 or 3 times?
You know, since I'm not there, I actually don't know the precise revenue this year, but it might be 10 to 15 times revenue. No, we wouldn't have sold for 2 to 3 times. Mm-mm.
But you would have sold for less?
I don't think. I don't think they would have sold for much less, because we knew the value. We knew that it was just growing in value, and eventually, we had investors with really deep pockets. So, eventually, the markets would have been good for a public offering, and CVS would have just had to cool its jets on how fast we were going to roll out. So, I think had CVS not come up with something really attractive at this time, the board would have had the appetite to explore some of the other options that you suggest.
I have to ask one more as long as we're right there, and that's with regards to your stock options and opportunities there. Can you share with us anything that it took the board to entice you to come on board? I imagine what their offer was with some types of options or whatever, and I'm sure the students would be interested to know what you would hold out for before you would come on board. What kind of expectation you have for ownership there or something else?
I'm trying to remember, but I think I asked for 3 to 5%, and they gave me, I think, 5% of the outstanding shares, but 3% of the fully diluted, and that's kind of low. I mean, if I'd been a better negotiator, I would never do that now. I'd insist on probably 8 to 12%, but I didn't. I used a local attorney in town. You got to do that, but all my shares vested, and you know, there's never enough money, and there's always enough money, so I'm grateful. Yes?
You've had to do a lot of fundraising and talking with investors. What do you think are some key concepts that investors, or ideas that investors like to hear that kind of helped you, get them on your side?
They like to hear an elevator speech told very succinctly. There's no business that's too complicated to develop an elevator speech around, and I've heard many entrepreneurs try to pitch and say, well, it's really complicated, and it takes 12 paragraphs to describe it. Well, forget it. No one's going to invest. And no one wants to feel stupid. So the more simple you can make your business sound so that the listener feels like they get it, they're going to be more likely on your side. don't ever say there are no competitors, because no one will buy that. They may not be precisely like you. I mean, at Honeywell, we used to say we didn't have any competition for motors that were sold in red boxes. But, you know, they may not be precisely like you, but there are competitors for your mind share or your dollars. Tell a compelling case. My board chairman always criticized my pitches, though, because he said I wasn't aggressive enough. Because I didn't like to, I always presented a plan that I thought I could make if I were still in the company at that time. And the problem is that VCs aren't used to hearing pitches done that way. So then they discount what I said instead of discounting off what would be a more aggressive pitch. So any other questions? Oh, and the other thing about my pitches to investors, after about a year, I was too cheap to do color copies. And I didn't have any pictures in it. And we flew down to Koch Industries. Koch is one of the largest, maybe the largest private company, I don't know, in the United States. Anyway, K-O-C-H. And I did this whole presentation, and we flew down on Glenn's plane, and we had the board there. And it was all black and white, and it was all words. And Glenn said, you know, I think you better spring to have a more professional presentation made with some pictures and, you know, some color. And he was right. I should have done it long before. I just got in the habit of being cheap and didn't do it. But there are companies in town that will help you do that. Yes, great questions. I hope this was relevant for you in some way. And just really pleased that you're interested in starting a new business. It's the engine. It's really the social engine of our country. I mean, you think about education or social work, it's starting new businesses, creating employment, meeting unmet needs that really is the social fabric of our nation. It's really important work. So it's wonderful that you're interested in it. Thank you for having me.